Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we held at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
If everybody could just have a moment of silence for those who departed 100 years ago today. Thank you. You may be seated. Color guard, please dismissed. Let's give it up for Lieutenant John Laurie. That was a great job at our national anthem. And the fire department, color guard, tremendous job. My name is Martin Moore. I'm the Brooklyn Parks Commissioner. I'm honored to help the Borough President as your Master of Ceremonies for today. You have a beautiful day to commemorate the Centennial Memorial, and we're doing it at a great place. Prospect Park is not the greatest park in Brooklyn, not the greatest park in New York City, but it's the greatest park in the world. And the person who is responsible for taking care of it and keeping it up to date is the amazing president of the Prospect Park Alliance, Administrator of Prospect Park, here to welcome you. Give it up for Sue Donahue. Sue?
Thank you, Marty. Thank you very much, and welcome to Prospect Park. As Marty said, I'm Sue Donahue, and I have the great pleasure of being the president of this park and the park administrator, and I have the great pleasure of being able to work with such wonderful partners in the Parks Department, including Commissioner Silver and Borough President Marty Moore. I'm thrilled to have you all here this morning on such a beautiful day. Prospect Park, for the past 30 years, the Prospect Park Alliance has prided itself not only on being the driving force behind the restoration and ongoing care of this beautiful 585-acre park, but by also providing a gathering space for the community to come together, to celebrate, to have family reunions, picnics, gatherings, but also as a place for commemoration. We plant thousands of trees in this park every year, many of them dedicated to loved ones, to new babies, to weddings, but also to people who've passed away. So it's our pleasure to host this afternoon and to recognize this significant milestone. None of the work that we do in the park would be possible without the great support we receive from the community, from our partners in the Parks Department, as I mentioned, from Marty Moore and his staff, but also from the Borough President Eric Adams, from Laurie Cumbo, from all of the council members and elected officials that surround the park. It is that partnership, it is that collaboration that makes this park thrive, that makes these acres the beautiful, restorative place that they are for the entire community. So I'm so thankful for that collaboration and so thankful to be able to celebrate that today and every day with all of you. So thank you so much for coming out, for helping us be part of this celebration, and for also helping to make sure that Prospect Park continues to be welcoming and accessible to the over 10 million people who visit us every single year. As we gather here today, we also, from the Alliance, want to convey our deepest sympathy and condolences for those lives lost 100 years ago. It should be said that they are in our thoughts and prayers, deserve our deepest sympathy and gratitude, and will stay with us long after today. So thank you again, welcome to Prospect Park, and thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Sue. And this event was really a seminal event in history. Ron Schweiger will tell you more about it later, but this was the 9/11 of its day. It was the Pearl Harbor of its day. It was the where were you when the president was shot day when Kennedy was killed. That's how it was taken back at that time. And, you know, so York, things move on, but to commemorate it 100 years to the day is an amazing thing, and the leadership of our great borough is why that happened. So I don't need to tell the folks here that Brooklyn is the center of New York City, and therefore Brooklyn is the center of the world. And the guy who represents us leading that great borough of Brooklyn and who came up with the commemoration idea is our great Borough President Eric L. Adams.
Thank you, Marty, and you have the second best job in Brooklyn, you know. And really, we want to thank all of our partners who assisted us. Majority Leader Laurie Cumbo is on her way. Sue, who really has done an amazing job in this park. As you look at the construction around this park, you see the continuation and an evolution of making this a place where families can come together and really celebrate the diversity of this great borough. And we want to thank Sue for continuing to doing that. We also want to thank Marty, who's here and has really agreed to MC, but also just what he's doing with our parks and our open spaces throughout the entire borough. Pat Baker, who's the Community Board 9 Chair, Brian Laffey, the NYPD 78th Precinct, James Leonard, City of New York Fire Department, Andy Byford. Not only does he bring the right understanding of our system, but he brings the energy. And far too often, Andy, that many people throw up their hands and think of impossibility. You have redefined that term and made it possible. And I think we're going to see some great actions in our subway system. And it really personifies this moment about safety as we look at the rails. Earl Phillips, TWU, Local 100 was unable to make it, but we do want to acknowledge their presence. We want to acknowledge the president of also from Concetta from the New York City Transit Museum. We're also asking all of you to take a tour, get the rich history of the Transit Museum. Bailey Brez, Brooklyn Historical Society, Jeff Richmond, Greenwood Cemetery. Some of the victims are buried in Greenwood cemeteries. More than a cemetery, it's a living monument of some of the great people who lived in the borough of Brooklyn. When you think about 100 years ago, I think Marty said it in a very eloquent fashion. That was an accident with over 90 people perished. You look at some of the faces, not only were men and women also part of this tragic incident, but also children. 90 people died at a single transit incident. It had the same impact of what I felt when I was a police officer and our Center of Trade was attacked. It's what many people felt when they also experienced some form of tragic incident, if it's a Pearl Harbor or any other incident that really allows and calls for us to benchmark where were we, what were we doing, and how did we respond to this tragic moment. Those 93 lives today, we're saying that you were not forgotten and you will not be forgotten. It is our moment of reflection here in the borough of Brooklyn. Despite all that has happened, if we are fortunate to live long enough, we will be misfortunate to have to experience some form of pain. Today, we are saying, how do we turn pain into purpose? And that is what is happening here. And this important acknowledgement really would not have been flagged if it wasn't for Frank Valerio. Frank, if you would come up and join me as I give the proclamation, we want to symbolically give it to you. I know I saw Frank earlier. Frank reached out to my staff. It's everyday people that bring extraordinary acknowledgments of events that take place in history. As a firefighter, He understood what happened here, and he reached out to my staff, and this really started the transformation of this moment of a place that should be acknowledged. He's stationed at ladder 113 in Prospect Lefferts Garden. And so really I want to thank Frank, and please let's all give Frank a hand for really going beyond the call of duty to bringing to attention this horrific event, this incident. The Malbone Street Wreck left an enduring legacy that not only changed the way we ride the rails and the way our brothers and sisters in labor actually work the rails, but it literally changed the fabric of Brooklyn. This street that we call Empire Boulevard at that time was called Malbone. And the name Empire Boulevard changed so it would not have a negative connotation attached to the area. It is difficult not to reflect on the number of lives that were lost, and the historian who we have here will go into the particulars of it. But clearly today we are doing what I stated as using a painful moment and using it as a purposeful moment. We now have stricter safety and training rules for employees and our transit infrastructure, much of which still exists today because of this accident was improved for passengers and for employee safety. In fact, arguably, the entire accident transformed how our transit system is operating. At one time, it was a private company, and it led to the private company collapsing and moving on, that its successor eventually sold the company to the city of New York. And we have what's currently one of the most complex, sophisticated, integrated transportation systems on the entire globe. Today will be laying a wreath and posting a historical summary of the Prospect Park BQ station, but I am also committing to allocating capital funds that we will put a permanent plaque at the site. I look forward to collaborating with the agencies and governmental entities and my local electeds in the areas and colleagues to make sure that we have a permanent edifice that acknowledges the 93 lives that were lost. Many of them were Brooklynite, but all of them were New Yorkers, and most importantly, all of them were Americans. And it is our responsibility and obligations to ensure that their deaths will not be left unmarked and unacknowledged, and we are doing that today. This is the starting point of a continuation of how do we acknowledge the loss and commemorate the lives of those 93 New Yorkers. And so on behalf of all Brooklynites, 2.6 million people, we would like to give this to firefighter Valerio for bringing this to our attention. Ordinary people doing extraordinary things. I call this a moment of reflection, a Betsy Ross moment that I like to say we still salute a flag that's just a woman sat in her living room and put those stars and stripes on, and hundreds of years later, we still acknowledge its existence. So it's ordinary people that do extraordinary things and go beyond their call of duty to call attention to those things that are impactful to all of us. And so we want to thank you, firefighter Valerio. On behalf of all Brooklynites, I acknowledge the 93 lives that were lost in the railroad accident beneath the intersection of Flatbush Avenue, Ocean Avenue, and Malbone Street, known currently as Empire Boulevard. In the community of Flatbush and Brooklyn, I recognize that this horrific and tragic event illustrates the phrase, turning pain into purpose, because today there are stricter safety and training rules for employees, which has contributed to the vastly improved condition of the New York City subway system for passengers and employee safety. I encourage all Brooklynites to learn more about the history of this event, of our borough's history, and to cooperate together to discover ways that we can improve safety procedures as we utilize different modes of transportation that are now daily options. And I join with all assembled to memorialize this historic event in Brooklyn history. I, Eric Adams, Brooklyn Borough President. Again, we want to truly thank you, firefighter Valerio. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Borough President, and thank you for your amazing leadership of all things Brooklyn. You are correct. It is a complex and amazing transit system. It is very lucky for all New Yorkers to be able to get around so quickly in New York City. And I'm pleased to introduce the president of New York City Transit, Andy Byford. Andy.
Thank you. Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming today on what is a truly sad and auspicious day for New York City and also for everyone and anyone involved in transit. So, Commissioner, Mr. President, Chief, and ladies and gentlemen, thank you for allowing me to speak today. So I'd just like to say on behalf of the 50,000 fabulous, wonderful men and women of New York City Transit that we share this community's remembrance of this tragic day today. 100 years ago today, something happened that no railway professional ever wants to happen on their watch. A terrible, terrible accident that took the lives of 93 innocent victims, that devastated families, that left hundreds of people injured. And I would actually include I'll say operator Luciano, but he wasn't. He was dispatcher Luciano. That dispatcher should never have been put in that position of having to drive that train. So to me, he was a victim, and I can tell you on my watch, that kind of thing absolutely would not go on. The good news is that since that wreck 100 years ago, a huge amount of progress has been made in the management of safety in railways across the world, and certainly that's the case also for New York City Transit. We have improved car equipment. There's no more wooden cars. We have cars that are very, very integrally sound. They're built of steel, and they're designed to absorb crash energy. They have great braking systems. We have new signaling systems that provide protection against trains overrunning red signals and mitigate against the risk of collisions. We have event recorders. We have enhanced maintenance procedures, regular maintenance procedures carried out by our professionals out there on the system, and using high-tech equipment to make sure that you and your families are kept safe. We've improved our signals, and the Borough President alluded to the fact that we've got big plans to make this yet better. So we have what are called signal timers. They are devices to time and enforce adherence to signal to the signaling system, to make sure that people aren't going too fast and to make sure that they understand what the speed limit is in that particular area. We have a centralized control facility, our rail control facility. We've improved the track. So you can see here, this is all a system, the train, the signals, and the track. We've installed plates with better clips and steel to hold the rail more closely to the track and keep it tight. There's what are called friction modifiers. We have a train that goes around, relentlessly goes around, checking to make sure that there are no broken rails or other rail defects. And we have a relentless inspection regime that checks track standards and material specifications. So that, if you like, is the physical stuff, but it's also about the professionals. It's about my wonderful 50,000 people. We give them enhanced training. They are professionals. I'm very proud of my operators. I'm very proud of my station staff. I'm very proud of my maintainers. These people are professionals. They go out, and every day they move 8 million people, which is no small undertaking. And if you saw the recent 60 Minutes show, they do so against the odds, using very old, still safe, but very old equipment. And I'll come back to that point. We have safety professionals. My VP of Safety, Carl, is here today. Who again assist us in going around doing safety audits to again never let your guard down, to keep checking to make sure that people are fit for duty, that signage is clear and well marked, and that training is up to date. I just wanted to mention the future. We have talked about our Fast Forward plan. The Fast Forward plan will progressively, over the next 10 years, completely modernize New York City Transit. If we get the funds, and we will, that's my prediction, or at least some of them, we will progressively transform this system, and not just in terms of making it more capable, adding capacity, and making it more reliable, but we will continue that relentless focus on safety. So I just want to say a few thank yous, first of all, before I close with quite a personal comment. I would like to say thank you to Conchetta and the wonderful team from the Transit Museum. It's an absolute, Conchetta, jewel in the crown of New York City Transit and the MTA that we have this fabulous facility. So if you haven't been to it yet, shame on you, you should get down there. It's absolutely fabulous. I'd like to say a big thank you to our union partners. It is a partnership. At the end of the day, we may have our differences from time to time, but we never will and should never have differences when it comes to safety. So I salute our various union partners. I salute our colleagues at TWU, and also a big shout out to my colleague Mario Biceri, President of the UTLO, and his colleagues on his executive, and the other unions with whom we could not keep this city moving. They're the people that do the work, and I salute them. So I said I would just finish on a personal note. Mr. President, you made reference to 9/11, which was, of course, a seminal moment for New Yorkers that was seared into your psyche, and we in the UK felt that too. Two things have seared into my psyche in my career. Number one was the terrible fire at King's Cross in November of 1987. I was at university at the time, and I watched with horror on French TV as you saw this terrible fire unfold. Why am I mentioning that? Because A, 31 people were killed, but B, because subsequently, a few years later, 1995, I became the group station manager of King's Cross Station, which was again seared into my psyche, because every year you would see this terribly sad procession of the relatives, families come to a memorial like the one that we're having today. And that never left me, that you have this abiding responsibility that you can never let your guard down for 1 minute. We've just introduced we've just introduced group station managers on this system, on the New York City subway system. I gave each and every one of them a copy of the Fennell report, which was the coroner's inquest report into the King's Cross fire. And I've said, I want you to read it. We never, ever want this to happen in New York. Second seminal moment for me was becoming a safety director later in my career. And if you have the words safety and director, controlling mind, in your title, that is not something that you take lightly. So my commitment and my memory, my abiding memory, and my salute to the 93 victims of this terrible tragedy is that we at New York City Transit will never forget what happened to you, what happened to your families, and as long as I'm president, we will never let our safeguard on safety down. That will always be absolute priority number one. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andy. And just a quick shout out. I see some members of the Society of Old Brooklynites here, so just a shout out. I'm also an SOB. So we also see, you can laugh at that. I also see many members of the New York City Fire Department here. And 100 years ago, they were responding to this incident, and they're here again responding as they do every day. You know, over the years, the equipment may have changed. I know some of the buildings may not have, but the vigilance, the dedication, the amazing bravery has not. So let's, before our next speaker, let's give it up for all the members of the fire department that are here. And I'm very honored to introduce the Chief of Department for the Fire Department of the City of New York, James E. Leonard. James.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you to Eric. It took a true leader to put this entire thing together in remembering what happened that day. To all our people that are here today, it takes a village to put this all together and to run this great system, what is going on. But it's all about remembering. In the FDNY, we're no stranger to this type of event. We do it all the time. And we go to great lengths to never forget the memory of our members who made this supreme sacrifice. And we vow to never forget. We hold beautiful memorial services for our fallen members, and we honor their memory at the locations where they bravely served and ultimately gave their lives. And, you know, I just pointed out that this intersection here is no stranger to tragedy. In 1972, across the street where Wendy's is right now, it was a Wetson's, and there was a young rookie cop, Miguel Servant, who was shot and killed stopping a robbery in 1972 right across the street. And in 2008, in January, right at Ebbets Field Housing, Lieutenant John Martinson from Engine 249 lost his life in a fire right here. So this location right now has seen tragedy before, but like all tragedies, we want to rebuild and move on and make things better. And we do this so history is not lost, so that we can learn we can learn from what happened that day. And I think of so many things. Mr. Byford, we just recently met with his entire staff up at fire headquarters to talk exactly about things like this is going on. It was just made mention, if you look at the firefighters that are here now, these are the exact same companies, 249, 280, ladder 113, ladder 132. Same exact companies, the same exact firehouses that responded to this incident that day. And people ask me about what has not changed in the New York City firefighters is the heart and soul that these firefighters bring to the equation. That day, the New York City Fire Department was on the scene in about 2 minutes, along with hundreds of New York City police officers doing what New York City cops and firefighters have done for over 100 years, and that's protecting the life and property of the citizens of New York, and we're always there. So it's fitting. That's why we're here today about that, but it comes down to the work of one person bringing this attention, and that's firefighter Frank Valerio. Served in 113 for over 20 years, and that firehouse was one of the first to respond to the disaster 100 years ago, along with others. I don't know, and I'm not saying this is a joke, if they had horses back then. I think they probably still had horses. They were coming to that same neighborhood, and you have to remember how difficult it was back then. No power tools, no lighting, all those things just didn't exist. Yet, we don't look at it. They had the most modern equipment available at the time, and people made the most hard decisions to go out there. Frank took the initiative to research this terrible accident, which had been largely lost to history. I was born and raised in Brooklyn. I was educated in Brooklyn. I've worked in Brooklyn. I knew this incident had happened, but I didn't know how much it had happened until actually Frank came to our attention, and we really started looking at it. But then he brought it to the attention of the most influential elected official in this borough, Borough President Eric Adams. And it always takes, a lot of people have ideas and a lot of people know stories, but it takes one person to be that leader, to step up, to put everybody together, to bring it, and that leader is the Borough President Eric Adams. And you deserve the credit for putting this together with all these different people in such a sensitive type of event that Malbone Street, this collision involved. It was such a tragedy to what was going on. So we thank you for doing that. And that's why when the Borough President's office embraced us and began to plan for this event, they asked us to participate. And we were proud and we were honored to come here to stand with the Borough President, stand with the Transit Authority, stand with all our partners, stand with the residents of Brooklyn, to all our elected officials, that these people's lives were not lost in vain. 93 people were killed in this horrific accident, over a couple hundred injured. And it took a lot of hard work and dedication to where we are now. They did not die in vain, because the system is so much. People have talked about it. I don't want to take too much from the historian. The greatest other tragedy, I think, in this borough probably occurred in the Brooklyn Theater Fire back in the 1880s, when there were over 500 people killed in downtown Brooklyn in a theater fire. But laws were changed. Things would change, just like with the safety that was brought in, all right, to make sure that this never happened again. And as the chief of the department of the FDNY, and Mr. Byford as the president of New York Street Transit, these things we work every day to make sure that incidents like this don't happen. And we need to know about what caused these things to go on. It's the same system still going on, but it's much, much safer. And every day we want to make sure that this doesn't go on. We train in the FDNY every day on the transit system. We have our own subway simulator with 2 stations at our training academy. We teach about rail safety. We teach about that. At the Rail Control Center with the Transit Authority, we have a battalion chief on duty in that Rail Control Center 24 hours a day to coordinate with the Transit Authority to make it safer for those riding public, the 8 million people a day that ride the New York City subway. When I tell people that, it's an unbelievable amount of people to think. It's just beyond the scale most people can even think, and it's done safely, and we're always looking to make that safer. But we train, we form with our partners, especially with the Transit Authority. But when we get the when we get the support from the leadership of our elected officials, especially Eric Adams here, we get this. It only enhances our safety. It enhances the safety of the people of all this city, but especially the people of Brooklyn. So I want to thank everybody who's involved in this ceremony, especially Mr. Borough President. This is just an unbelievable event that we should honor that. Many times a society can be judged on how we honor our dead, and we are doing that, and we are doing the right thing today by honoring. We may not know those people, but those people are us and we are them, and we are still in the same system. We work in and live in the greatest city in the world, and it has to be safe. So thank you to everybody who came today. Thank you to the greatest firefighters in the world and my FDNY, for the guys who responded to this. Thank you for what they do every day. They do an unbelievable job. But thank you and Godspeed.
Thank you so much, Chief, and thank you for what the firefighters and officers do every day. An amazing person and leader in Brooklyn, is a friend of history, is a friend of art, is a friend of parks, and is certainly a leader in Brooklyn. She's put millions of dollars into improving areas all over Brooklyn, including this park, and she's a great leader and a great friend. I'm pleased to introduce the Majority Leader of the City Council, Laurie Cumbo.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Commissioner Marr. This is such an important day, and I want to, as many have said, thank the Borough President for bringing this history to my attention. We are in such the Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, the world's going at 1,000,000 miles per second. Everything's so fast. It's here, it's now, it's microwaved, it's quick. Brooklyn is the greatest borough in the world. It's fantastic, it's amazing, it's sexy. Everybody wants to come here and experience it. But while things are moving so fast, so many of these realities, the history of Brooklyn gets lost at times. And it's important that we recognize this great history and what really has made Brooklyn the greatest borough in the world. We have to recognize that tragedies have happened, that losses have happened, that people have given their lives in order to make this the greatest borough in the world. And as a new mom, I'm 44 years old now, I'm a new mom, and I have a son now who's 14 months old. And for me, understanding as I have a new family, just how important family is, and coming home to your family every night, and the joy of being a parent. And I just can't imagine what goes on in the minds of a firefighter, of a police officer, of those that work for transit, that so often are called to give of their lives, to sacrifice the greatest love in the world, and that is a family, to protect those in New York City, to give of your life. When you see so many in the NYPD and the FDNY, when they take off their caps and you see the images of their family and who they hold dear, we just really say thank you. Thank you for protecting us. Thank you for putting New York City first and foremost, of making those split decisions that would challenge and rock the psychology of most of us if we had to make those decisions. And thank you for allowing us to be able to choose our families first and to go home to our families at night because of the sacrifice that you make for New Yorkers all across the city. So we humbly thank you for that sacrifice, and we recognize the lives of those 93 individuals that have now made New York City one of the safest cities in the world, with one of the largest transportation centers in the entire world. But so many had to lose their lives in order to make it one of the fastest as well as safest infrastructures that we have in the world. So I'm just proud to be here, proud to be a part of this history, proud to let others know about it. And I can't thank you all enough for being here today. And hopefully we will share this experience with our families, our children, and to let them know the core of what Brooklyn is really built on, which is bravery, which is tenacity, which is dedication, which is courage, which is a fight to continue to make this the greatest place to raise a family. So thank you all so much. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your love, for your dedication, and for keeping Brooklyn's history rich and alive for generations to come. Thank you.
As the majority leader said, and the Borough President said, and President Byford said, and as the Chief said, history is important. Good and bad history is important, so we learn from it. It is a safer transit system now. Thanks to the FDNY, it is a safer Brooklyn. Thanks to the leadership of the Borough President, it's a safer place to be. But we want to know what that history is. So to briefly describe the Malbone Street disaster, we'd like Ron Schweiger, our borough historian, to come up and briefly talk about that. Ron?
Thank you, Marty, and good afternoon, everyone. As was mentioned, there's good history, there's bad history, and in this case, it's an incident that happened 100 years ago today. And in the next couple of minutes that I have, I'm going to describe to you exactly what went on, what caused it, why did it happen. First of all, most of the railroads at that time, there was no MTA at that time, most of the railroads were privately owned. And the railroad that this occurred on was the Brooklyn Rapid Transit, or the BRT. And the engineers were on strike. The engineers who worked for 6 consecutive years were earning 50 cents an hour. That's just part of it. There's a lot more to it that I'm not going to get into, but there's a lot more history behind that. But the engineers were on strike, and at 5 a.m. on November 1st, 1918, the engineers went on strike. And some of the other employees joined them as well. 13 hours and 42 minutes later, at 6:42 p.m., Friday, November 1st, 1918, 193 people died, and well over 150 to 200 or more were injured. In fact, some of the injured that were not injured badly were triaged 350 yards from here, where that big apartment house is back there. That's where Ebbets Field stood. And Ebbets Field, home of the Brooklyn Dodgers, those of us who remember that team, my home away from home when I was a kid, a triage center was set up at Ebbets Field for the less injured people. So, what happened? Well, a BRT supervisor, his name was Thomas Blewett, and I'll tell you, he blew it. He gave the okay for Edward Luciano to take out the fatal train. He was not a motorman. Mr. Luciano, as was mentioned earlier, was a railroad dispatcher. His job, his assignment, was to assign engineers, conductors, and other employees to various trains each day. He was given about 2 hours of quote-unquote classroom instruction on how to run a train. Classroom instruction. The employee who put the 5-car train together was not the usual employee that did this. It was not his job. And what he did was, well, the lead car, which was where the engineer or the motorman sat, was a heavy 66,000-pound motorized electric car. But what this gentleman did, who was putting the train together, put 2 trailer cars, passenger cars, made of wood primarily, except for the base that housed the wheels. He put 2 of the trailer cars in succession behind the lead car. The BRT rules at that time forbid 2 trailer cars to be in tandem behind the motorman's car. That was not the case that day. Now, what was on Mr. Luciano's mind when he was given this task to run the Brighton Line train, which, by the way, started at Kings Highway and McDonald Avenue? That was known as the Culver Line. And his job was to take the train into Manhattan at Park Row, turn the train was not turned around. The other motorized car, he would get out, and walk to the other end of the train, the 5-car train, and now that car was the motorman's car, and the 2 wooden trailer cars were now behind his. And the next run was to come back into Brooklyn and eventually end up in Brighton Beach. He never got there. He was not familiar with the Brighton Line run that he was about to embark on. 3 days prior to Mr. Luciano taking out the train, he and his wife buried their 3-year-old daughter at Holy Cross Cemetery. She passed away from the Spanish influenza, which incidentally killed more than 500,000 Americans that year. 200,000 more than Americans died during World War I. Now, also, 5 days prior to the accident, the clocks were turned back 1 hour for the very first time 100 years ago. Don't forget to do that this coming weekend, okay? So now, at the time of the accident, it was going to be dark, okay? Keep that in mind. Also, the armistice, World War I was coming to an end. Everyone was waiting for that, obviously. 10 days after the accident, on November 11th, the armistice was signed, ending World War I. And also, 4 days after the accident, and a lot of Brooklynites and New York State residents were waiting for the very first time for women to vote in a New York State election. Not a national election, but New York State. So a lot of was on the mind of Mr. Luciano. Also, I mentioned about he and his wife buried their 3-year-old daughter 3 days prior. Well, 4 years prior, they buried another daughter, a 1-year-old child. So all this was on his mind. Well, the strike began at 5 a.m. Management and the striking engineers were nowhere close to a settlement. 13 hours and 42 minutes, at 6:42 p.m., Edward Luciano's train was entering the Malbone Street Tunnel, which would take him into the Prospect Park Station. However, unbeknownst to Mr. Luciano, a relatively new S-curve leading into the tunnel was in front of him. He couldn't see it as he approached at over 30 miles an hour on an incline. The sign on the wall said he was supposed to be going 6 miles per hour. If the clocks were not turned back, there still would have been sufficient daylight for Mr. Luciano to see ahead of him the sharp curve coming and the entrance into the tunnel. The train did not have headlights at that time. He didn't see the approaching tunnel and the curve ahead. The train entered the Malbone Street Tunnel at over 30 miles an hour. The lead car that he was in jumped the roof of the car, hit the roof of the tunnel, and the 2 trailer wooden cars behind him crashed into the concrete wall leading into the tunnel and were ripped to pieces as the momentum of the train and the 2 motorized cars behind them, twice the weight of the trailer cars, pushed these cars into the concrete wall. The cars were ripped apart. And again, 93 were killed and over 200 were injured. And today, obviously that tunnel isn't used. If you know the station, the Prospect Park Station on the Brighton Line, if you're traveling north from Brighton Beach and you get off at Prospect Park, to your right is the Franklin Avenue shuttle. To your left is the southbound train leading towards Brighton Beach. And to the left of that is another track that's not used. That's the track that Luciano's train was supposed to end up on. It never made it. Under construction at that time, now you know when you get into the Prospect Park Station today, after Prospect Park, the train continues straight, where the next stop would be 7th Avenue and Flatbush Avenue. Those straight tracks were under construction. The accident a year later would never have happened there would be no S-curve being used because of the new tracks under construction. This is a basic history of what happened and occurred and what was on Mr. Luciano's mind. As mentioned before by Mr. Leonard, that fire department, the police arrived very quickly. There were no lights. They had to get in there at the wreck to see what can be salvaged, who they can save of those who survived the wreck. They took wood laying around and they lit up the wood leading into outside the tunnel to light it up so they can see what they were doing. They lit it on fire. This is what happened here 100 years ago. And I would like to, again, thank my boss, Eric Adams, the Borough President, for getting the ball rolling to get this commemoration started. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Ron. As I mentioned earlier, we're in the amazing Prospect Park, the green space for the world, really. But there's another amazing green space in Brooklyn that predates Prospect Park. We're honored to have Rich Moylan, Greenwood Cemetery's president, with us. Hello, Rich. Thank you for coming. And we have the historian from Greenwood Cemetery here to speak, Jeff Richmond. Would you come up and just talk about the association? Thank you so much.
Thank you, and good afternoon. Much of what we do at Greenwood Cemetery is related to bringing alive the stories of the people who were interred there. We have 570,000 people interred at Greenwood, and many of them have Brooklyn stories to tell. And so the chief mentioned the Brooklyn Theater Fire, and the Brooklyn Theater Fire Monument is at Greenwood Cemetery. Chief mentioned many of the members of the fire department who are here today. And in the spring, with our trolley that you see to our left, we did a tour of hero firemen from New York City and Brooklyn Fire Department from the 19th century. And so we try to mine those stories. We have millions of documents pertaining to these individuals who are buried there. And one of the groups of records that we have is our chronological books, which list all burials between 1840 and 1937. And so I can break that book open and go to November 1st of 1918 and look for people who may have died of injuries related to what happened here 100 years ago. And I can look for the address where these people lived. And so we've been able to mine that material. And so 93 people died in this crash. 14 of them are interred at Greenwood Cemetery. And so that's a representative group and a group that I could work with in terms of research. And so of the 14, 11 were men, 3 were women, not what, certainly what you would probably expect in the 19th century, in the early 20th century, excuse me, when men much more dominated the workforce. And so this is a Friday evening, 6:42 p.m. Most of the people on the train are coming from work. Several worked in Lower Manhattan. They're coming home. And we made up a map there showing where those 14 people lived. And a number of them were just a block, 2 blocks, 3 blocks away from where they lived. Most of them were in Flatbush and in Ditmas Park and in this area. And they were about to be home and about to join their loved ones. They ranged in age, the people at Greenwood, from 18 up to 54 years old, and kind of scattered through there. I understand that the youngest of the people who actually died here, not at Greenwood, was 14 years old. And their names, so let me read their names of the people interred at Greenwood. Lewis Hopkins, Fred Minton, Margaret Sullivan, George Holmes, Addie Pilkington, Harold Schaefer, Reich Silas Musson, Ferdinand Rotha, Alexander Palmetto, David Kerr, John Engren, Edward Erskine Porter, Bessie Love, and Raymond Payne. And I was able to find online, through the miracle of the internet, photographs of 3 of the individuals who died here. And this is Raymond Lewis Payne, probably around 10 years before this crash. He was 18 years old when he died here. He lived on Avenue H in Brooklyn. And this is Edward Erskine Porter, who was in the bond business on William Street in Manhattan, had graduated from Williams College, was the head of the debate team at Williams College. His father was a well-known broker in Brooklyn. He had called the Porter house, spoke to the woman who did not know yet that she was a widow, asked if Edward had arrived home yet, was told that he had not, came to the hospital that had most of the victims of the crash, could not find his son there, went to the morgue which adjoined the hospital, and saw his son lying there. And then we have George Holmes, who is in the middle of this family portrait. George Holmes was born in Flatbush, grew up in Brooklyn. His parents lived in Brooklyn. He had 6 siblings who lived in Brooklyn. He was recently married. A number of them had children. A number of them were recently married. 13 of the 14 of them were listed as having died on November 1st, and so it looks like they were brought out of here already dead, listed with fractured skulls primarily. Most of them were working class. 2 young men who died here, their papers that were filed in the surrogates court listed estates totaling in one case $100 and in the other case $250, and their primary estate was their wrongful death claims for their death here. They lived in Kensington, in Ditmas Park and Flatbush, on East 18th Street, on Caton Avenue, on Bedford Avenue, on East 19th Street, on East 12th Street, on Westminster Avenue, on Webster Avenue, on Farragut Road, on Ocean Avenue, and on East 10th Street. And so today, hopefully we put a little bit of a face on some of these individuals. And when we commemorate this and remember this evening at 6:42 their loss, we will think of them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Only in Brooklyn there's always a connection. My grandfather actually built Edwin Porter's house, and I live a few addresses down in the house I grew up in. So very interesting stuff. If you haven't been to the Transit Museum, you should go there as soon as possible. It's an amazing place. And here, the director of the Transit Museum, Conchetta Anna Benciavenga, is here to talk to us. Did I get it right?
Thank you. And the truth is, I'm Irish. That's actually true. I'm half Irish. And also, my dad's from Brooklyn, from Havermeyer Street in Williamsburg. So thank you so much for that introduction. And thank you for all the Transit Museum love. You are all indeed invited to come to the Transit Museum. Good afternoon. I'm Conchetta Benciavenga, the director of the New York Transit Museum. As the largest museum dedicated to urban transportation history in North America, and as an institution that has proudly called Brooklyn home for the past 42 years, we are honored to be here today to participate in this moment of reflection on the centennial anniversary of the Malbone Street Wreck. We know that on November 1st, 1918, a series of events and factors came together in the worst possible way, at the worst possible time, and led to the tragic events of the day. And we know that in the ensuing hours, days, weeks, and years, the city's transportation network and the city itself continued to expand at a breathtaking rate. What happened at Malbone Street certainly had an impact. The Transit Museum exists because New Yorkers live the way we do because of proximity to mass transit. Most folks just don't know it. Every time you get on a steel-constructed train car, you are doing so in part because of what happened on that day. One of the lasting effects of this accident was the transition away from wooden and composite wood and steel cars. And by 1927, all trains that traversed tunnels or on routes with significant underpasses were steel. Other technological advances like the signaling system and the development and installation of the tripcock that could act as an emergency brake all grew out of the aftermath of the wreck. And while there remains debate about exactly how much training Luciano received, everyone can agree that it wasn't enough. In 1918, the Brooklyn Rapid Transit Company, a private company, required approximately 120 hours of training to operate a train, as opposed to the 6 months of training required today. There is so much to learn and to discuss and to explore with this event that you are all invited to continue the conversation at the Transit Museum, where 2 of the museum's historians, Andy Sparberg and Joe Cunningham, will be hosting a gallery talk today at 3. And perhaps the most important, the most profound, and the most deeply impactful takeaway from the Malbone Street Centennial is exactly that. It has been 100 years since the worst accident in New York City transportation history. To be sure, there have been good chapters and bad, decline and recovery, growth and more growth in the region's transportation network, but there has never, ever been an accident as significant as Malbone. It is my great hope that 100 years from now, on the bicentennial anniversary, the date of November 1st, 1918, still stands in the history books. For we'll know, then as now, that the people of this city took the lessons of that day to heart and remained committed to ensuring a safe and sound experience for the hundreds of millions of people they serve. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Conchetta. Earlier, I asked you for a moment of silence, and I only made captain of the altar boys. So here to do a real prayer and blessing of the wreath, I have the MTA Chief Chaplain, Father George Anastasio. Father? I gave it my best shot.
It's all right, you got it. You know, in the Old Testament, Moses parted the Red Sea, right? Well, we in the clergy business can part the Red Sea, but sometimes Flatbush Avenue, Atlantic Avenue is a little bit of a difference. So, but thank you for pitching in. Brothers and sisters, let us bow our heads as we offer a moment of silence and a momentary prayer. Heavenly Father, bestower of every blessing, both heavenly and earthly, we stand in awe of your magnificent glory. We stand before you to thank you for bringing us together so that we might remember and in going forward protect more lives from this tragedy. We ask, dear Lord, that you assign radiant angels to bless this wreath that we are about to lay. We ask also in a most special way, dear Lord, to have under your protection, under your mighty right hand, our firefighters, our transit employees, our police officers, and that your benediction might reside in the hearts and minds of all those here present on this day and every day moving forward. Amen.
So at this time, the Borough President will lead us with the wreath to the place that we'll lay it across the street. Those of you that would like to join may follow the Borough President. If not, thank you so much for coming today and sharing in this commemoration.